The early autumn breeze swept through the narrow streets of Bath, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts and damp cobblestones. Helen stood outside a glistening boutique on Milsom Street, gazing at the elegant necklace displayed in the window. A slender chain of white gold, adorned with a single sapphire teardrop, simple, timeless, and undeniably beautiful. The price tag read £500. Her breath caught slightly. She wasn't dressed for luxury shopping. Her coat was worn, her hair hastily tied back. Yet in that moment, she let herself dream. Just for a second. Just one moment of indulgence. She imagined how the necklace might rest on her collarbone. How, for once, she might feel noticed. "Mum, seriously." A voice snapped behind her. She turned to see her 15-year-old son, Thomas, rolling his eyes. His school blazer was slung carelessly over one shoulder. "That's way too expensive for you," he scoffed. "You're not worth it." Helen froze. The words struck sharper than she expected. A young sales assistant glanced out at them from behind the glass, her expression unreadable. A couple passing by glanced at Helen with mild curiosity. She laughed lightly, trying to shake it off. "Come on," she said softly, motioning for Thomas to follow her. But inside, her chest tightened. Those words echoed louder than she wanted to admit. Later that evening, Helen stirred a pot of lentil stew in their modest kitchen in Lark Hall. The windows fogged with steam, and the smell of thyme and garlic filled the air. Her husband, Richard, sat at the table, scrolling through his phone while Thomas crunched loudly on crisps. "Mum was eyeing some £500 necklace in town today," Thomas announced casually, not even looking up. "Proper ridiculous." Richard looked up sharply. £500? Are you out of your mind, Helen? She turned slowly, wooden spoon in hand. "I didn't say I wanted to buy it." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to believe that?" "I was just looking." "We're not rolling in money," he said sharply. "Be reasonable." Helen felt a familiar dullness settle over her. 7 years ago, she had left a thriving career in publishing to raise Thomas. She had been good at her job, better than good, in fact. But Richard had convinced her it would be better for the family. And she had agreed. She had given up her salary, her office, her colleagues, and gradually, even her sense of self. Now, she was Mum. Just Mum. Not Helen the editor. Not Helen the storyteller. Just a background figure keeping everything from falling apart. "I was just looking," she repeated, quieter this time. Thomas snorted. "Well, stop looking at things you can't afford. It's embarrassing." That night, Helen sat on the edge of her bed long after the house had gone silent. The street lamp outside cast long shadows on the wall. Her wedding ring felt heavier than usual. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. There was a woman there she hardly recognized. Someone who had lost more than time. A decision began to take shape. Faint, but solid. Something had to change. A week passed. The rain returned to Bath, steady and unyielding, as though determined to wash something away. Helen moved through the house like a shadow, doing what was expected, laundry, meals, school runs, while her mind turned elsewhere. The decision she'd felt forming that night had not faded. It had deepened. One Thursday morning, once Thomas had slammed the front door behind him on his way to school and Richard had left for the office, Helen stood in the hallway, staring at the narrow shelf by the stairs. On it was a small wooden box, barely noticed in daily life. She opened it and removed an envelope, one she had not touched in years. Inside was her CV, outdated, yellowing at the edges, printed back when she still used fountain pens and wore silk blouses to meetings. She read it slowly. Her fingers trembled. Then she turned to the desk, opened her laptop, and began typing. Hours passed unnoticed. Her hands flew across the keys. Paragraphs formed. Dates were corrected. Skills updated. She added a line about volunteering at the local library, trying to make the gap look purposeful. When she finished, she stared at the screen. A part of her felt proud. A part of her felt terrified. Could she really re-enter the world after 15 years away? She didn't tell Richard. She didn't tell anyone. She simply started applying. Quietly. Privately. Carefully. One late afternoon, Helen found herself seated across from a woman named Olivia Granger, the manager of a small publishing company in Bristol. The interview was happening over video call. Helen had dressed smartly, her hair pinned back neatly, a soft scarf hiding the neckline of her oldest jumper. "You have quite a gap here," Olivia said, gesturing at her screen. Helen nodded. "Yes, I stepped away to raise my son. But I've kept myself engaged. I've done freelance editing, community writing workshops, and recently volunteered at the library. I'm eager to return." There was a pause. "Your experience is impressive," Olivia said, after a moment. "But the industry has changed. We use newer software now, tighter deadlines." "I'm not sure. I learn quickly," Helen interrupted, her voice steadier than she expected. "And I'm more driven now than I've ever been." Olivia smiled faintly. "We'll be in touch." That evening, the door slammed open. Thomas stomped in, soaked from the rain, uniform crumpled. "There's no snacks," he moaned. Helen turned from the stove. "There's fruit." "I'm not eating that." "Why is there never anything good in this house?" Before she could respond, Richard walked in. He took one look at the kitchen. "Same stew again," he muttered. "It's been 3 nights in a row." Helen placed the spoon down. "We're trying to be careful, aren't we?" Richard scoffed. "Oh, so now you're managing the money. That's rich." Something inside her flickered. Later that night, as rain tapped softly against the window, an email pinged on her phone. Helen picked it up, her heart beating faster. It was from Olivia Granger. She opened it, and froze. Helen stared at the screen, hardly daring to blink. The email was short, no more than a paragraph, but it made her breath catch in her throat. "Dear Helen, thank you for speaking with me. We'd like to offer you a part-time editorial position at Granger House Publishing. We believe your experience and voice could add something valuable to our team. Please see the attached offer and let me know by Friday. Warm regards, Olivia Granger." She reread it. Once. Twice. A third time. A job. After all these years. She pressed her fingers to her lips, unsure whether she wanted to laugh or cry. She felt weightless, and for the first time in a long while, powerful. She wasn't just someone's wife. Or someone's mother. She was Helen again. The next morning, Helen woke early, hours before Richard or Thomas stirred. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the kitchen window, watching the early mist over the garden. The quiet buzz of possibility hummed in her chest. She was going to take the job. She would have to find childcare, organize transport, maybe even buy new clothes. The list swirled in her head like autumn leaves. But for once, she didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt alive. At breakfast, she said nothing. Richard sat scrolling on his phone, ignoring the eggs she'd fried. Thomas barely glanced up. "We're supposed to bring in cakes tomorrow for Form Charity," he muttered. "Right. I'll bake something tonight," Helen replied absently. "No offense, but can you not make one of your weird lemon things?" Richard chuckled without looking up. "He's right. That last one tasted like dust." Helen paused. Then smiled. "No problem. You can both bake your own cakes this time." Thomas looked up, startled. Richard narrowed his eyes. What's that supposed to mean? But Helen had already stood, picked up her bag, and grabbed her coat. I've got somewhere to be, she said with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Bristol was grey and busy that morning, full of commuters with takeaway coffees and umbrellas angled against the drizzle. Helen arrived at the office early, her new blouse slightly stiff, shoes pinching, nerves fluttering beneath her ribs. Olivia met her with a warm smile and a clipboard. Welcome aboard, Helen. Her desk was modest, surrounded by walls covered in manuscript notes, sticky tabs, and editorial deadlines. She settled in quickly, sorting papers, drafting blurbs, editing chapters. The quiet hum of work was like music to her. At lunch, Olivia leaned over. You're fitting in well. You've still got the rhythm. Helen blushed. Thank you. I was afraid I'd lost it. You haven't, Olivia said simply. By the time Helen returned home, the sky had darkened. She stepped into the hallway, peeled off her coat, and listened. No welcome. No, how was your day? Thomas was upstairs, shouting into his headset. Richard was on the sofa, sipping wine, the telly blaring. She walked into the kitchen. On the counter sat a takeaway container, half-eaten. She spotted a note. You were out. We ordered. That was it. No one had asked. No one had waited. And yet, Helen wasn't angry. She stood in the center of the kitchen, hands resting on the cool marble surface. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt hers. Then, a vibration in her handbag. Her phone buzzed. It was a message, from a name she hadn't seen in years. Helen stared at her phone. The message preview was short, vague. Hi Helen. I know it's been years, but I heard about you and Richard. If you're free for a coffee, I'd love to catch up. Clara X. She sank onto the edge of the bed, heart thudding. Clara. Clara Grayson, her closest friend from university. They used to spend hours reading poetry on campus lawns, sneaking into lectures they weren't enrolled in, dancing in their student flat with wine and dreams of the future. But when Helen married Richard, things had changed. Clara had gone on to become a successful editor in London, traveling frequently, always on the move. Helen had stayed behind, house, child, routine. They'd drifted. Or perhaps she'd let herself drift. Helen typed a reply. I'd love that. Are you in Bristol? Clara responded instantly. Just for the week. Shall we say tomorrow? Noon. That cafe near the cathedral. The next day, Helen arrived early. The little cafe was tucked between a bookshop and a florist, the air filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and ground coffee. She took a table by the window, nerves fluttering again. Clara walked in 5 minutes later, wearing a navy trench coat, her auburn curls pinned up messily. She hadn't changed, still stylish, still effortlessly confident. Helen. Clara pulled her into a warm embrace. Look at you. I wasn't sure you'd remember me, Helen said with a nervous laugh. I've missed you. I tried to reach out, but, Clara's voice softened. You sort of disappeared. I think I disappeared from myself, Helen admitted. They talked for over an hour, about their lives, their regrets, the messy pieces in between. Clara's eyes softened when Helen mentioned the divorce. You deserved better, Clara said. He never saw you properly. I always hated that. Helen swallowed. He wasn't always cruel. But he liked me small. He liked me safe. Clara nodded. And you let him? I did. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a card. I might be overstepping, she said, but there's something I want to offer you. Helen took the card. It read. Clara Grayson. Editor-in-Chief. Stonebridge Literary Group, London. I know you've taken a job already, Clara continued, but if you ever want something more, something bigger, you've got the voice for it. And I have a feeling it's been buried for too long. Helen was speechless. I've just been promoted, Clara said, sipping her coffee. And I need someone I trust on my team. If you're interested, come spend a weekend in London. Just, see. That night, Helen couldn't sleep. She lay awake in the dim light, staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting with every passing car. London. The very idea felt reckless. Impossible. And yet. Could she say yes? Could she leave Bristol, even part-time? Would Thomas understand? Would Richard try to stop her? But another question echoed louder. Did it matter? The next morning, as she left for work, Helen passed Richard in the kitchen. He barely acknowledged her, muttering something about needing his shirts ironed. She didn't answer. Just grabbed her coat and keys. Then Thomas called from upstairs. Mum, where's the white Charger? I told you I need it for school. Helen paused at the door. I'm not your maid, Thomas, she said calmly. Look for it yourself. And then she stepped outside. But she hadn't made it halfway down the street before her phone rang again. Not Clara. Richard. She answered. His voice was cold. You need to come home. Now. Helen's stomach twisted. Why? It's about Thomas. Helen's boots echoed against the pavement as she hurried home, dread knotting tighter with every step. She didn't even take her coat off when she stepped through the front door. Richard stood in the hallway, arms folded, jaw tight. What happened? She asked, breathless. Go upstairs, he said curtly. He's in his room. She didn't wait. She ran up the stairs two at a time and burst into Thomas's bedroom. He sat at his desk, hunched over his laptop, pale and wide-eyed. The glow of the screen cast long shadows across his face. Helen knelt beside him. Thomas? What's going on? He didn't answer at first. Just clicked the mouse and turned the screen towards her. It was an email. Short. Blunt. From his school's head teacher. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Grant. We've received troubling reports concerning Thomas's behavior and online activity. We request an urgent meeting to discuss the matter further. Helen blinked. What does this mean? Thomas's voice cracked. It's about something I posted. A joke. But they think I was threatening someone. I didn't mean, Mum, I swear, I didn't mean it. She took his hands. They were trembling. What did you post? He hesitated. Then opened a private chat window. A screenshot showed a message under his name. Sometimes I think school would be better off if it all just burned down. LOL. Helen's stomach dropped. Oh, Thomas. It was just a joke, he said, panic rising. Everyone talks like that. It wasn't real. But not everyone gets caught, she said quietly. Behind her, she heard Richard's footsteps. This, he snapped, is exactly what I warned you about. You've been too soft on him. Letting him act like some misunderstood poet while he spirals into this. Helen stood. He's scared, Richard. He needs help, not blame. What he needs is discipline. Structure. Helen turned back to Thomas. Why did you write it? He looked away, eyes brimming. I was angry. Everything's been messed up. You and Dad shouting all the time. Then you moving out. I didn't know how to say it properly. Helen's heart fractured. Darling, she whispered, we'll sort this. But you've got to tell the truth. To me. To the school. I'll get expelled, he muttered. You might, she said gently. But it won't define you. That evening, Helen sat at the dining table, staring at the school's number on her phone. She'd booked the meeting. Tomorrow morning. She would face it. Thomas had agreed to come, but barely spoke after that. He stayed in his room, headphones on, eyes distant. And Richard was seething. "You're not taking charge of this," he barked. "You're letting him get away with dangerous nonsense." Helen didn't rise to it. Instead, she looked at him. Really looked at him. The man she'd spent years defending, even when he drained her voice dry. "Do you remember what you said to him that night?" she asked. "When he was 8. He'd spilt his cereal. Do you remember?" Richard blinked. "What are you on about?" "You grabbed his arm so tightly," he cried. "You said, even babies get it right more often than you." He rolled his eyes. "That was years ago. But he remembers. And so do I." Richard didn't speak. "You made him believe that love has conditions. That approval must be earned. But not anymore." She stood, took her coat, and headed for the door. "Where are you going now?" "To clear my head." She opened the door. But standing on the doorstep was Clara. And she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a woman in a charcoal suit, holding a briefcase. Clara's eyes met Helen's, calm but firm. "I didn't want to call," she said. "This needed to be said in person." Helen stared at her. And then at the woman beside her. The woman who now spoke. "Mrs. Grant, I'm here on behalf of your late mother's solicitor. There's something we need to discuss." The living room felt colder than usual. Helen sat on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped, heart hammering. Across from her, Clara sat stiffly, eyes flicking between Helen and the woman in the charcoal suit, who had introduced herself as Miss Layton from Pembroke and Rowe Solicitors. Richard hovered near the doorway, arms crossed, tension radiating from every muscle. Thomas remained upstairs, unaware of what was unfolding. Miss Layton opened her briefcase with slow precision, retrieving a slim folder tied with a red ribbon. "This," she said, placing it gently on the coffee table, "is your mother's final will and testament. It was amended 6 months before her passing. I'm here because, until now, its contents were not fully disclosed." Helen frowned. "I thought everything went to Clara." "That's what she told me." Clara stiffened but said nothing. Miss Layton gave a small nod. "Originally, yes. But the final version made several changes. Your mother appointed me executor and requested that I deliver the final clause only when the time was right. And that time," said Richard bitterly, "just happens to be now." Miss Layton ignored him. She untied the ribbon, flipped open the folder, and read aloud. "To my daughter Helen. I have left the truth I denied her for far too long. This is not about inheritance, but about healing. Inside this envelope is a letter. Read it when you are ready. All my love. Margaret." Miss Layton reached into the folder and handed Helen a sealed envelope. Helen turned it over in her hands. Her name was written in familiar handwriting, slightly slanted, deliberate strokes, no flourish. Just Helen. Her throat tightened. "What truth?" she whispered. "That's for you to decide," Miss Layton said. "But there is one more matter. Your mother owned not only the family home, but also a cottage in Devon, Ashwood Hollow. She left it to you. Entirely." Helen blinked. "A cottage? I've never even heard of it." Clara's face was pale now. "Mum mentioned it once, years ago. She said it was an old place from her youth. I never knew she still had it." Miss Layton slid a second envelope across the table. "The keys. And the deed." Helen stared at it. Her name was printed clearly on the front. Richard let out a short, humorless laugh. "So now you've got a secret house and a mystery letter. How convenient. Helen stood up, the sealed envelope still in her hand. This isn't about convenience. It's about answers. She turned to Clara. Why didn't you tell me she'd changed the will? Clara looked down. Because I thought you didn't want anything to do with her. You cut all contact, Helen. You said she wasn't your mother anymore. I said that out of pain. Not because I stopped being her daughter. Silence settled over the room like dust. Helen took a breath. I'm going to Devon. To that cottage. Maybe the truth is waiting there. Richard scoffed. Running away again. I'm walking towards something, actually, she said, voice firm. And this time, I'm taking Thomas with me. He froze. You can't just. I can. And I will. If you truly care about him, you'll let him breathe for once. Miss Layton cleared her throat. There's a train that stops near Ashwood Hollow. I've arranged transport and access. The property is ready for use. Helen nodded. Then that's where we're going. She clutched the letter in her palm. Somewhere, deep inside that cottage, the past waited. And with it, the truth her mother had never dared speak aloud. But what she didn't know yet, was that the cottage wasn't empty. Ashwood Hollow stood at the end of a narrow lane, veiled in mist and brambles. The cottage, though modest, exuded an eerie charm, stone walls mottled with ivy, windows clouded from time, and a crooked chimney that leaned as though whispering secrets into the fog. Helen stepped out of the taxi, Thomas clinging to her hand. He looked up at the cottage with wide eyes. Is this haunted? He whispered. She smiled faintly. I don't think so. But it's old. Very old. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of damp timber and forgotten seasons. Dust floated in the dim light that filtered through the curtains. Helen lit the small fireplace and unpacked only what was necessary. She wanted the space to remain untouched, for now. The letter from her mother sat unopened on the kitchen table. Night fell quickly. Thomas had settled in one of the upstairs rooms, asleep beneath an extra blanket. Helen remained downstairs, staring at the envelope. Her name still seemed to glow against the paper. She tore it open. The letter was dated 6 months before Margaret's death. My dearest Helen. There is so much I should have told you. But shame is a heavy cloak, and I wore it too tightly for too long. You were not born of cruelty. The man who hurt me, he is not your father. I lied because I was afraid of what the truth might mean to you. The real story is buried at Ashwood Hollow. You must go to the attic. Your real father was someone I loved, once. But he disappeared before you were born. I never found out why. Forgive me. Forgive the silence. Go to the attic, and you'll understand. Helen read it twice, then again. The words blurred. Her entire life, every resentment, every shouted word, every time she'd said you're not my mother, had been built on a lie. Margaret hadn't been protecting herself. She'd been protecting Helen. Suddenly, a floorboard above creaked. Helen froze. It wasn't Thomas. His room was on the other side. Another creak. Slow. Deliberate. She stood, heart thudding, and reached for the old iron poker by the hearth. The stairs groaned beneath her feet as she ascended. At the landing, she turned right, following the sound. The door to the attic stood ajar. She hadn't opened it. She pushed it wider. A chill met her. The air felt ancient. The attic was lined with dust-covered boxes, a few faded paintings stacked against the wall, and a single trunk in the center of the room. It was locked. She knelt beside it, running her hand along the lid. As she did, something shifted behind her. She turned sharply. No one. Only shadows. And then, whispering. She spun back. The lid of the trunk was now slightly open, as though it had never been locked at all. Inside, wrapped in yellowing newspaper, was a stack of letters, some from Margaret, others from someone named Edward. There were photos too. One in particular caught her breath, a young man, dark-haired, smiling, with Margaret beside him. On the back, a handwritten note, Ashwood Hollow, 1982. My forever. She stared. Was this him? Her real father? Another sound. Helen looked up. At the far end of the attic, the outline of a man stood in the gloom, unmoving, shrouded by shadow. Who's there? She whispered. No answer. She reached for the poker again, heart racing. But when she stepped forward, the figure was gone. Only cold remained. Morning came reluctantly to Ashwood Hollow, the mist thick and stubborn, curling round the windows like breath on glass. Helen barely slept. The letter, the photo, and the shadow in the attic had stayed with her like a song she couldn't silence. She sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea that had long gone cold. Thomas was still asleep, and she hadn't the heart to wake him. The attic trunk was now open in the corner, its contents spread out before her. There were dozens of letters from Edward, thoughtful, affectionate words, all addressed to Margaret. One in particular stood out. My dearest Margaret. I've left the money under the floorboards in the sitting room, just in case. I don't trust him. If anything happens to me, please take Helen and go. Don't wait. I know you're scared. I am too. But I love you. And her. Always. Edward. Helen dropped the page. The sitting room. She pushed aside the rug and knelt, palms pressing against the creaky floor. After some time, one board gave way with a hollow clunk. Beneath it, a tin box wrapped in cloth. Inside, an envelope full of faded banknotes, and a necklace, a small gold pendant in the shape of a thistle. She clasped it tightly. Everything she thought she knew had unraveled. Her mother hadn't been cold. She'd been terrified. Of someone. But who? Helen sorted the remaining letters, trying to piece together the years. Then, folded within a bundle, she found something that made her breath catch. A birth certificate. Name, Helen Grace Darnley. Father, Edward Henry Darnley. Mother, Margaret Eliza Darnley. She stared. Her mother had married him. Why hadn't she told Helen? Why the lie? As she reached for another letter, a loud knock echoed through the cottage. Sharp. Urgent. She froze. Another knock. She opened the door cautiously. A man stood outside, mid-60s, all coat and scarf, silver hair swept back. He held a walking stick with a carved oak handle. There was something familiar about his face, the same sharp chin as in the photograph. Sorry to intrude, he said. His voice was gentle, but wary. I'm looking for Margaret. Helen's heart pounded. She's dead. The man closed his eyes briefly. I feared as much. Who are you? He looked at her properly now. His eyes widened slightly. You look just like her. She stepped back. Answer me. I'm Edward. Edward Darnley. Helen gripped the doorframe. Her knees almost gave way. You're supposed to be dead. He looked confused. I was told Margaret left. That she'd taken the child and gone. She did. But she said you vanished. Edward's face crumpled. She never told you the truth, did she? He stepped inside slowly, scanning the small cottage. I built this place for her. For you. But someone didn't want us to be together. Helen's voice trembled. Who? Edward's jaw tightened. My brother, Leonard. He always said Margaret was a mistake. He threatened her. Said I'd lose everything, my name, My inheritance, if I stayed with her. He turned to her, sorrow in his eyes. I never meant to leave. But when I tried to come back, you were both gone. Helen felt dizzy. All this time, she whispered. You were alive. A small voice interrupted them. Mum. Thomas stood at the bottom of the stairs, rubbing his eyes. Edward stared. Helen hesitated, then crouched beside her son. Thomas, this is Edward. The old man smiled gently. I think I'm your grandfather. Thomas blinked. You look like Mum. They all did. But the moment was broken by another sound. A car outside. Tires crunching gravel. Helen went to the window. A sleek black vehicle had pulled up. From it stepped a man in a charcoal suit, with an expression that made her skin crawl. Edward paled. Leonard, he whispered.